Okay. You have done a lot of research on neoliberalism, and one of the things that you point out in your publications is that it is very important to go back to the reason why neoliberalism came to life. Could you tell us a little bit about that reason why neoliberalism started off, and why it's so important to look at that particular reason now, so much time later?
Yes, I think the reason is that nowadays we have very conflicting ideas about what neoliberalism stands for, and so in order to get a little bit of a more definitive meaning, I think it is necessary to go back to the context of its emergence, and that context is characterized by the crisis of liberalism, because this is the 1930s and the 1940s, when you have all kinds of phenomena and developments, from the rise of Keynesianism, the Great Depression, the New Deal in the United States, and of course the rise of fascism and National Socialism and communism on the other end of the political spectrum. And neoliberalism is a response to that, and an attempt to rejuvenate liberalism, to modernize it so it is able to contend or confront these new challenges.
So that implies that when we think that neoliberalism has started off with Thatcher or Reagan, we are wrong. It is much older, and there is an underlying problem. Would you say that the underlying problem is still there? I mean, it's still, so to say, the cause that makes neoliberalism thrive. Could you say that, or?
Well, the first thing that you said, of course, that is a puzzle in itself, if you will, how these ideas came to be developed and then lay dormant for such a long time. And strictly speaking, I think the first instantiation of neoliberal politics is actually in Chile under the Pinochet military dictatorship, and I think the causes could not be the same, I think, but I think what neoliberalism is very good at doing is to seize upon crises. I mean, the causes of the crises that we're talking about are very different, and the nature of these crises, they're always contended, but neoliberalism has done a very good job, both in the crisis of the 1970s, but I think also in the more contemporary crises, to provide a certain narrative for which they then provide the solution, and that is part of the success of neoliberal ideas, I think, that translate into neoliberal practices, because it's not as if they're sort of inherently superior or more plausible. I mean, far from it.
Sure. And another result of your research is that you point to a specific form of neoliberalism, Ordoliberalismus in German. Could you explain a little bit what kind of neoliberalism that is?
Well, it is. It rests on a certain idea about markets and how markets function, and I think this is an underlying concern for all neoliberals, and the ordoliberals have a particular way of spelling it out, and that is markets have to have a framework, the so-called competitive order, that provides for the right kind of competition taking place without direct interference into the market, or at least that is what they suggest. I'm interested in the political preconditions of this kind of politics of the competitive order, if you will, that's supposed to provide a beneficial competition. That was their argument, and I think it presupposes a state that is capable of at least sort of fighting back particular interests, societal interests that aim to gain exemption from this kind of competitive order, some kind of special treatment, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
And therefore, democracy that offers institutionalized channels of influencing policy making is inherently problematic, I'd say, from that ordoliberal perspective. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're anti-democratic, but it's a danger that lies in democracy, I think, for the possibility of consistent, coherent policy making, which means the politics of the competitive order.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, last year, 2016, January, the German Chancellor has made a speech. She delivered a speech for the Eukert Stiftung, and she sympathized very much with ordoliberalism. And I'm bringing this up because for democracy in Europe and neoliberal policy making in Europe, that might be significant. Would you indeed say that the policies of the German Chancellor are ordoliberal?
Mm.
Is that a
Well,
claim that can be made, or?
Yeah, well, it's controversial, that claim, because I think those people who work at the Walter Eucken Institute, they would deny it. They would deny that there's any ordoliberal influence on the crisis management that is, very much led by Germany and very much influenced by Germany. And Angela Merkel the fact that she goes there and gives the speech says a lot about the status, I think, of ordoliberalism in Germany. I don't think that Angela Merkel in particular is so strongly influenced by it, but I think we have some kind of institutional heritage, if you will. Certain ministries, maybe the Bundesbank, they used to be, or they still are, strongholds of ordoliberal ideas in a vague fashion sometimes. It's more about policy paradigms and worldviews and heuristics as to what is the nature of the problem, I think, the basic nature of the problem that is transmitted. It's not necessarily specific policy recommendations, I think, and it's not as if everybody there is reading the works of Walter Eucken, but it's a certain way of viewing the world, and according to that view, you give a certain crisis narrative, and you see a certain nature to the problem. And just to give one example, part of the politics of the competitive order, or the constitutive principles of the competitive order, is individual liability. You have to have individual liability. And that translates into the German position, not just the German position, but the German-led position, I think, in the sovereign debt crisis, that Greece has to repay its debt, because it's a matter of Greece having overspent, possibly being profligate even, but it's not a systemic issue. It's a matter of you have to repay your debt. It's a matter of individual liability. You made the choices that you did, and you have to bear the consequences.
Yeah.
And if we let you out of this, with debt mutualization, which sort of, we all know to some extent that has happened, right? And there have been bailouts, but the overall position is this cannot happen, because otherwise others will, go down the same road, right? And you have a moral hazard situation. And I think that's very much sort of the basic position of German political elites when it comes to dealing with these issues. And another thing, just one more example, is the importance of monetary stability. And from that you derive, of course, the demand that the European Central Bank stays out of kind of, financing state deficits, for example, or, overstepping its mandate, which is limited to price stability, right? And so I think we can see the correspondences, at least.
Yeah, sure. You've published a lot on your research in German and in English, and just recently a book in Dutch has come out. And if I'm not mistaken, one of your ideas is that we are not beyond neoliberalism. It changes its face, so to say. It adapts itself. Could you tell us a little bit about that? This this enormous capacity to adapt and to adopt new ideas?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that we have to simply take note of the fact that neoliberalism has been able to morph all kinds of other ideas and ideas from other strands, if you will, of thinking and political projects into its own project, if you want to call it that way, and that's part of its success story. And at the same time, we must be careful, I think, not to overstate that capacity, because otherwise we create a phenomenon that, if we wanted to overcome it, we could not possibly do it, because it's just because it's constantly morphing and it's constantly changing and adapting. I think there's something to that, but I think, again, we should not overstate that. I think maybe the question of overcoming neoliberalism is also put in the wrong way, because I don't really think that that is the plan. I think it is about strengthening other contending political projects against a neoliberal project. And because, what does that mean, overcoming neoliberalism? Overcoming markets? I don't know if that is the project that we're pursuing. And at least right now, I can't really conceive of what exactly that means.
Sure.
At some point, I might be able to, but right now, I'm not sure I see that. And therefore, I'd say this is about strengthening other ways of dealing with societal issues and economic issues and so on.
Sure. Okay. I think that for our readership who are interested in care ethics, it's one of the projects that care ethics works on. So that's, I can see that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.